Wooden canoes crossed 2,000 miles of open Pacific Ocean, carrying families who would never see their homeland again. Most people assume ancient mariners hugged coastlines, venturing only where land remained visible on both horizons. The reality shatters this comfortable myth. Polynesian navigators deliberately sailed toward empty blue voids, where a single navigational error guaranteed death by thirst, starvation, or drowning in storms that appeared without warning. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these stories. Write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to see people from around the world united by one story. This is a story for sleep, so get comfortable, dim your screen brightness, and lower the volume to a comfortable level. Let this story become a bridge to your dreams. The numbers themselves defy belief. Between 1500 BCE and 1280 CE, Polynesian voyagers discovered and permanently settled over 1,000 islands scattered across 10 million square miles of ocean. They created the largest triangle of human habitation ever achieved, with Hawaii marking the northern point, Easter Island the eastern corner, and New Zealand anchoring the south. Europe fits inside this triangle 7 times over. No other ancient civilization attempted anything comparable. The distance from Hawaii to Tahiti exceeds 2,600 miles, roughly equivalent to sailing from London to New York. Polynesian families made these journeys in canoes carved from tree trunks, propelled by woven sails, carrying live pigs and planting materials for establishing farms on islands they hoped existed beyond the horizon. They accomplished this without compasses. No maps guided their way. Written language didn't exist in their culture, meaning every scrap of navigation knowledge lived solely in human memory. Metal tools were unknown, making every aspect of canoe construction an exercise in Stone Age engineering. Yet their success rate in finding tiny islands in an ocean covering 1/3 of Earth's surface suggests technical sophistication that baffled European explorers for centuries. Consider the mathematical improbability. Easter Island measures just 14 miles across and sits 1,500 miles from the nearest inhabited land. A navigator sailing from Tahiti toward Easter Island travels through empty ocean for weeks, aiming at a target representing 0.01% of the visible horizon. Miss by 2 degrees, and the canoe sails past into an empty ocean stretching 2,000 miles to South America. There's no second chance, no turning back once provisions run low. Wind and current conspire against precision. Pacific currents run at 2 knots, meaning a canoe could drift 50 miles off course in a single day without correction. Storms blow vessels hundreds of miles from intended routes. Cloud cover obscures stars for days at a stretch. Waves rise to house height during cyclone season, capable of snapping wooden hulls or washing crew members overboard. The ocean offers no mercy to navigational mistakes. European scientists initially refused to believe Polynesians accomplished these voyages intentionally. Thor Heyerdahl's 1947 Kon-Tiki expedition attempted proving that South Americans drifted westward on ocean currents, settling the Pacific Islands by accident rather than Polynesian skill. His theory gained popularity among academics who couldn't conceive how primitive peoples might possess technical knowledge surpassing European maritime capabilities. The assumption revealed more about European arrogance than historical reality. Genetic evidence later proved Polynesians originated from Southeast Asia, spreading eastward against prevailing winds and currents, exactly the opposite of accidental drift. Linguistic analysis confirmed deliberate colonization. The languages of Hawaii, Easter Island and New Zealand share common roots, despite 5,000 miles of separation. No accident explains such cultural continuity. Archaeological discoveries demolished remaining doubts. Excavations on remote islands revealed agricultural terraces, irrigation systems, and deliberately transported plant species present from the earlier settlement layers. Colonists didn't wash ashore hoping for survival. They arrived with comprehensive plans for establishing permanent communities. Chicken bones found on Chilean archaeological sites dating to pre-Columbian times proved Polynesians reached South America and returned, completing round-trip voyages spanning 4,000 miles. The true mystery isn't whether Polynesians crossed these distances, but how they achieved such precision. A European ship in 1700 CE, equipped with compass, sextant and detailed charts, still missed intended islands regularly. Sailors trained in mathematics and celestial navigation sometimes wandered for weeks searching for landfall. Scurvy killed crews who ran out of provisions during extended voyages. Mutinies erupted from the psychological strain of seeing nothing but water day after day. Polynesian navigators somehow avoided these disasters with far greater consistency. They reached islands separated by thousands of miles of featureless ocean, established viable colonies, and maintained contact between island groups for centuries. The archaeological record shows regular trade in basalt tools, obsidian, and cultural goods travelling between archipelagos. Evidence of routine voyaging across distances Europeans considered nearly impossible. Something in their method worked with startling reliability. Modern computer simulations attempting to replicate Polynesian discovery patterns through random drift fail spectacularly. The islands they settled aren't positioned along obvious current routes. Many lie upwind of likely origin points, requiring vessels to sail against prevailing trade winds. This settlement chronology reveals systematic expansion, reaching nearby islands first, establishing populations, then launching expeditions to more distant targets. This pattern indicates planning spanning generations. Traditional European navigation relied on latitude determination through star heights and dead reckoning for longitude, an imprecise system that caused countless shipwrecks. Polynesians possessed neither sextants nor chronometers, yet their accuracy in reaching specific islands suggests positional knowledge rivaling or exceeding contemporary European methods. Some process allowed them to track position in open ocean without instruments, maintaining course corrections over weeks of travel. The environmental challenges amplify the achievement's magnitude. The Pacific isn't a uniform body of water, but a complex system of intersecting currents, seasonal wind patterns, and regional weather phenomena. Equatorial doldrums can trap sailing vessels for weeks. Cyclone seasons render large ocean areas temporarily unsurvivable. Water temperatures shift dramatically with depth and latitude, affecting both weather and sea conditions. Navigating this environment required encyclopedic knowledge of ocean behavior. Consider the provisioning challenge alone. A voyaging canoe carrying 50-80 people needed water for potentially 30-40 days at sea. Salt spray contaminated stored water. Tropical heat increased dehydration. Food had to remain edible without refrigeration while occupying minimal space. Live animals required feeding and care. Agricultural seedlings needed protection from salt water. Every item loaded onto a canoe represented calculated decisions about survival odds. The psychological dimension adds another layer of difficulty. Modern sailors describe the terror of losing sight of land, of seeing nothing but endless water in every direction. Crew members on European exploration ships frequently suffered mental breakdowns from the isolation and uncertainty. Yet Polynesian crews included entire families, children, elders, pregnant women, all enduring weeks at sea with only faith in their navigator's knowledge separating them from death. One mistake meant extinction. A navigator who miscalculated star positions, misread wave patterns, or misjudged wind shifts condemned everyone aboard to slow death by thirst. Bodies would have floated in life preservers of their own making, wooden canoes becoming coffins drifting through empty ocean until wood rotted and sank. No rescue was possible. No one would ever know what happened. Yet they succeeded repeatedly, systematically, with success rates suggesting technical mastery rather than lucky accidents. The question that haunted European observers, that drove anthropologists to remote Pacific islands searching for answers, that sparked decades of academic debate, boiled down to 3 words. How did they? The answer lay not in any single technique, but in an integrated system of ocean knowledge so sophisticated, so precisely calibrated to Pacific conditions, that it took modern scientists decades to even understand what questions to ask. Polynesian navigators had transformed the ocean itself into a navigation instrument, reading messages written in star positions, wave interference patterns, bird behavior, and atmospheric phenomena. They had memorized the Pacific's geography without maps, stored centuries of observational data without writing, and passed this knowledge through generations without formal schools. The ocean that appeared empty to European eyes was, to trained Polynesian navigators, as readable as a marked highway. Every wave contained information. Each star position marked a direction. Specific cloud formations announced invisible islands over the horizon. The smell of land carried on winds from 30 miles away. Phosphorescence patterns revealed current directions. Birds became living compass needles pointing toward nesting grounds. Understanding how Polynesians accomplished these voyages requires abandoning European assumptions about primitive and advanced technology. Their achievement didn't stem from instruments, but from observational science refined across millennia. They had transformed human perception into navigation equipment, training bodies and minds to detect environmental signals invisible to untrained observers. The full story of their methods, the specific techniques that allowed families to cross thousands of miles of open ocean and find islands smaller than European cities, reveals knowledge systems that challenge modern understanding of what's possible without technology. Each component of their navigation toolkit represents sophisticated applied science: astronomy, oceanography, meteorology, and ecology integrated into practical survival knowledge. These weren't accidental discoveries or primitive guesses. Polynesian navigation represented one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, a systematic understanding of ocean dynamics that wouldn't be matched by Western science until the 20th century. The techniques they developed, the training methods they perfected, and the courage they demonstrated in sailing toward uncertainty created the Pacific world Europeans would eventually stumble upon and completely fail to understand. Night fell across the Pacific, and the ocean transformed into a navigation instrument more precise than any compass. Stars emerged in their thousands, each one a potential directional marker for navigators who had spent decades memorizing celestial patterns. European sailors knew perhaps a dozen major stars and relied primarily on Polaris for northern navigation. Polynesian wayfinders identified over 220 individual stars by name, position, colour, and the exact point where each rose and set on the horizon. They didn't simply observe stars, they constructed an entire compass from celestial movements. The horizon divided into 32 houses, each marking where specific stars appeared at dawn or vanished at dusk. These houses remained fixed relative to the canoe, creating a stable reference frame even as the vessel moved through thousands of miles of ocean. A star rising in the 7th house northeast would always rise in that position, regardless of the canoe's location. This consistency allowed navigators to maintain precise headings night after night. The technique grew more sophisticated. Master navigators memorized star paths, sequences of stars that rose one after another from the same horizon point throughout the night. As one star climbed too high for accurate bearing, another would rise in its place, maintaining the directional reference. A journey toward a specific island required following perhaps a dozen different stars in succession, each one picking up where the previous star became unreliable. Training began in childhood and continued for decades. Apprentice navigators learned to recognize stars not by their position in constellations, but by individual characteristics. Sirius blazed white-blue, Antares glowed reddish-orange. Altair appeared as part of a distinctive trio. Every star possessed unique features that allowed identification even in partially cloudy conditions where constellation patterns remained obscured. The real mastery emerged in knowing which stars passed directly over specific islands. A navigator heading from Tahiti to Hawaii knew that Arcturus passed through the zenith directly above the Hawaiian archipelago. When Arcturus reached its highest point in the sky, basic geometry dictated the canoe's position. Drift too far east or west, and Arcturus would peak at a slightly different angle, an error measurable through careful observation. Master navigators developed teaching methods that embedded this knowledge permanently. They constructed platforms floating in lagoons where apprentices lay on their backs for entire nights, watching star movements while instructors called out names and positions. The rhythm of learning resembled memorizing vast poems, each star a word in an epic recounting the ocean's geography. Students who couldn't recite complete star paths faced dismissal. Lives depended on perfect recall. They created backup systems for inevitable cloud cover. Knowing stars alone wasn't sufficient when tropical weather systems blocked entire sections of sky for days. Navigators learned to maintain dead reckoning by estimating speed through wave patterns and canoe response, calculating approximate position even without celestial confirmation. The moment clouds parted, they would snap instantly to star references, correcting accumulated drift. The dome of heaven became a three-dimensional map. Stars at different heights above the horizon indicated not just direction, but also rough latitude. A star that rose to 45 degrees in one location would reach 50 degrees several hundred miles northward. Experienced navigators could estimate their north-south position by comparing multiple star heights, creating a crude but functional latitude measurement system. Certain stars served specialized functions. The Southern Cross pointed toward the south celestial pole with reasonable accuracy, though Polynesians recognized it wasn't perfectly aligned. They compensated by using the cross in conjunction with pointer stars, creating a more precise southerly bearing. In northern Pacific waters, navigators switched to different stellar markers as familiar southern stars dipped below the horizon. The most remarkable skill involved detecting land from star observations alone. Islands altered local atmospheric conditions, creating columns of slightly warmer air that rose and distorted star positions near the horizon. An experienced navigator could observe star twinkling, rapid position changes caused by atmospheric turbulence, and deduce that land existed beyond sight beneath that section of sky. This technique worked up to 30 miles from shore, providing early warning that allowed course corrections before potentially sailing past an island in darkness. Clouds themselves became navigation tools when stars disappeared. Islands generated their own weather patterns, with warm land masses creating updrafts that condensed moisture into stationary cloud formations. A cloud that remained fixed while others moved with prevailing winds marked an island's position. At night, lightning often concentrated over land, providing directional flashes visible across enormous distances. The reflection technique pushed observational skills to extraordinary limits. Large lagoons reflected light upward, tinting the underside of clouds with distinctive turquoise hues visible from 30 miles away. Navigators scanning the horizon at sunset or sunrise searched for these coloured patches, which announced islands still beyond direct visual range. Dense forest created greenish tinges. White sand reflected brilliant patches. Each colour signature revealed different island characteristics. They understood celestial mechanics with sophistication matching ancient Greek astronomers. Polynesian navigators knew Earth wasn't flat. The way ships appeared hull first over the horizon, and the changing height of circumpolar stars with latitude proved curvature. They calculated that stars maintained fixed positions relative to each other across years, distinguishing them from planets that wandered through the zodiac. This knowledge prevented navigation errors that could result from mistaking Mars for a reliable stellar marker. Seasonal variations demanded additional memorization. The same journey undertaken in different months required different star paths. As the Earth's axial tilt shifted visible constellations, navigators maintained mental calendars tracking which stars dominated which seasons, adjusting routes accordingly. A star path perfect for June became dangerously inaccurate by December, when entirely different stars occupied those horizon positions. The precision achieved through these methods defied European understanding. When Western anthropologists first documented traditional navigation in the 1960s, they witnessed elderly Marshallese navigators identifying their position within 20 miles after multiple days at sea without instruments. Computer analysis of their star-based courses revealed accuracy equivalent to compass navigation, sometimes superior when accounting for magnetic variation that confused instrument-reliant sailors. Ritual knowledge intertwined with practical astronomy. Navigators learned chants encoding star positions, wave patterns, and island locations. These chants served dual purposes, preserving information through oral tradition and providing rhythm for memorization during long nights at sea. A navigator chanting star sequences maintained focus and accessed deeply embedded knowledge when exhaustion threatened concentration. The training created cognitive abilities measurably different from non-navigators. Studies of Pacific Islanders found that traditional wayfinders demonstrated enhanced spatial memory, superior celestial tracking abilities, and heightened sensitivity to environmental patterns. Their brains had literally rewired through decades of practice, optimizing neural pathways for processing the specific information types crucial for survival. Young navigators underwent tests that would determine their fitness for the responsibility. Masters would take apprentices far out to sea, then deliberately provide false information about position or heading. The apprentice had to recognize the deception through independent star observations and correct the course. Failure meant returning to additional years of training. Success meant gradually assuming greater navigational responsibility on actual voyages. The knowledge carried immense prestige. Master navigators ranked among the highest status individuals in Polynesian societies, honored alongside chiefs and priests. Communities understood that a single skilled wayfinder could mean the difference between successful colonization and extinction. Islands without competent navigators faced isolation, unable to maintain trade contacts or launch exploration expeditions. This prestige also created dangerous incentives. Some navigators reportedly guarded knowledge jealously, fearing that training too many successors would diminish their unique value. Others died before passing complete information to apprentices, resulting in lost routes and severed inter-island connections. The oral transmission system's fragility meant that a single generation's interruption could erase centuries of accumulated wisdom. European contact accelerated this knowledge loss catastrophically. Missionaries dismissed traditional navigation as superstition, disrupting the training schools where masters taught apprentices. Colonial governments imposed Western education systems that left no room for multi-decade apprenticeships. Metal tools and compasses seemed to make traditional methods obsolete, causing younger generations to abandon difficult memorization in favor of simpler instruments. By the 1960s, perhaps a dozen master navigators remained alive who possessed complete traditional knowledge. Most were elderly men on remote atolls, representing the final link to centuries of oceanic wisdom. Their deaths would terminate an intellectual tradition, as sophisticated as ancient Greek mathematics or Chinese astronomy, a body of observational science refined across millennia to solve the specific challenge of navigating the world's largest ocean. Yet stars alone couldn't explain Polynesian success. Celestial navigation provided directional bearings and rough latitude, but islands didn't announce their presence by hanging stars overhead. A navigator following perfect star courses still needed methods for detecting land beyond visual range, for determining longitude, for compensating when storms pushed vessels off intended routes. The star compass formed one component of a comprehensive system, effective only when integrated with additional techniques that transformed the ocean itself into readable text. The ocean spoke in a language invisible to European eyes, but perfectly legible to trained Polynesian senses. Waves carried information across thousands of miles, encoding details about distant islands, approaching weather systems, and the vessel's precise position within the vast Pacific. Master navigators felt these messages through their bodies, detecting patterns that seemed supernatural to observers who understood only the visual chaos of surface chop. 4 primary swell systems dominated Pacific waters, each generated by different wind patterns in distant storm zones. Deep ocean swells from Antarctic storms rolled northward with mathematical regularity, creating long-period waves that passed beneath the canoe at intervals of 15 to 20 seconds. Tradewind swells originated from subtropical high-pressure systems, producing faster waves with 8 to 12-second intervals. Local wind waves added surface texture. Seasonal patterns from monsoon systems contributed irregular interference. Each system maintained distinct characteristics in wave height, period, direction, and feel. Navigators learned to distinguish these systems simultaneously. A canoe might ride atop Antarctic swells while cutting through tradewind chop at perpendicular angles, with local wind waves adding surface confusion. Untrained sailors perceived only random turbulence. Master wayfinders identified 4 separate wave trains moving in different directions at different speeds, each providing navigational information. The skill resembled hearing individual instruments in a symphony, while others heard only noise. Islands disrupted these patterns in detectable ways. A piece of land rising from the ocean floor blocked incoming swells, creating a wave shadow extending for dozens of miles beyond the island. Inside this shadow, specific swell systems disappeared or diminished dramatically while others continued unaffected. The shadow's shape and size revealed the island's position and approximate dimensions. More remarkably, swells bent around islands and reflected backward, creating interference patterns that expert navigators read like ripples around stones in a pond. The wave reflection technique bordered on the mystical. When deep ocean swells struck an island's submerged reef shelf, a portion of that energy reflected back toward the open ocean. These reflected waves intersected with incoming swells at specific angles, creating areas of amplification where waves suddenly grew taller and zones of cancellation where the sea appeared unusually calm. By detecting these interference patterns, navigators could pinpoint island locations up to 100 miles away, far beyond any visual range. Training methods for wave sensitivity began in protected lagoons. Young apprentices floated for hours in calm water, memorizing the feel of normal ocean breathing, the gentle rise and fall of ambient swells. Instructors then introduced artificial disturbances, creating small waves from different directions. Students learned to distinguish simultaneous wave patterns by lying still and focusing on body sensations as different wave periods passed beneath them. Advanced training moved to open ocean. Apprentices lay in the bottom of canoes with eyes closed, calling out observations about wave direction, period and height based solely on motion felt through the wooden hull. Masters checked their accuracy against visual observation and star positions. Students who couldn't maintain consistent accuracy faced additional years of practice. Lives depended on reading waves correctly when stars disappeared behind clouds and visual landmarks vanished in fog or darkness. The canoe itself became a sensing instrument. Double-hulled vessels responded differently to waves approaching from various angles. Beam seas caused distinctive rolling motions. Following seas lifted the stern. Head seas produced pitching. Quartering seas combined multiple motion types. After years of experience, navigators internalized these responses so completely that wave direction registered automatically in consciousness, requiring no deliberate analysis. Deep ocean swells transmitted information across enormous distances. A storm system near Antarctica generated swells that propagated northward for 5,000 miles, weakening gradually but maintaining directional consistency. By tracking these swells back to their origin, navigators established reliable bearings towards southern latitudes. Multiple swell systems arriving from different directions created a lattice of reference lines across the Pacific. Wind waves provided shorter-term information. Fresh surface chop indicated recent local wind activity and gave immediate feedback about current atmospheric conditions. The transition from smooth ocean to choppy seas announced weather changes often hours before visual signs appeared. Sharp increases in wind wave height warned of approaching storms while conditions remained deceptively calm. Current awareness added another layer to water reading skills. The Pacific contained massive river-like flows moving thousands of cubic miles of water. The equatorial current ran westward across the entire ocean basin at speeds reaching 2 knots. Countercurrents flowed eastward at different latitudes. Eddy systems spiraled off major currents, creating temporary circulation patterns. Navigators learned seasonal current variations and how to use them for assisted travel or compensate when currents opposed intended courses. Temperature changes in water signaled current boundaries. A navigator trailing fingers in the ocean could detect the sharp transition where cold Antarctic water met warm tropical flows. These boundaries remained relatively stable seasonally, providing latitude references that complemented star observations. The technique worked even in complete darkness or heavy fog when all visual navigation failed. Phosphorescence revealed current patterns at night. Certain plankton species glowed when disturbed, creating bioluminescent trails behind the canoe and around any moving water. Strong currents produced distinctive glow patterns. Eddy systems created swirling light. The wake itself showed whether the canoe maintained a straight course or drifted sideways, critical information when wind and current pushed from different directions. Masters taught apprentices to maintain course by wave feel alone during starless nights. The navigator selected a dominant swell system, positioned the canoe at a specific angle to those waves, and maintained that relationship for hours through subtle steering adjustments. Even slight deviations became immediately apparent through changed motion patterns. This technique allowed precise navigation through complete darkness, a capability that astounded European observers who considered night sailing impossibly dangerous without lights and compasses. The intersection of multiple swell systems created localized standing wave patterns that marked specific ocean areas. 2 swell trains meeting at right angles produced pyramidal peaks at regular intervals, distinctive conditions that recurred in predictable locations season after season. Navigators memorized these patterns as landmarks, regions where the ocean's geometry announced position as clearly as any terrestrial mountain. Reef systems generated their own wave signatures, shallow coral structures forced deep swells to steepen and break, creating turbulent zones detectable from miles away. Atolls with narrow passages concentrated wave energy, producing outflow currents that could be felt by canoes approaching from specific directions. A navigator who knew an island's reef configuration could identify which island lay ahead based solely on how waves behaved near its submerged barriers. The most sophisticated practitioners claimed abilities that defied external verification. Some master navigators reported feeling island presence through subtle wave reflections detectable only when lying perfectly still in the canoe's hull, becoming so attuned to ocean motion that their bodies registered disturbances invisible even to trained observers watching from deck. Whether mysticism or extraordinary sensitivity, these navigators successfully located islands that others sailing the same waters missed entirely. Training created permanent cognitive changes. Navigators maintained continuous awareness of wave patterns even during routine activities, sleeping, eating, or socializing. Their brains processed wave motion data constantly, alerting them instantly to significant changes. This perpetual vigilance resembled how musicians hear harmony and dissonance automatically, requiring no conscious analysis yet registering every wrong note. The psychological challenge of trusting wave reading surpassed any technical difficulty. A navigator lying in darkness feeling confused cross swells during a storm had to maintain confidence that their wave interpretation remained accurate enough for survival. Doubt could paralyze decision-making exactly when critical course corrections needed execution. The mental discipline required to trust training over fear separated competent navigators from masters. Wave knowledge encoded in oral traditions through specialized chants and physical demonstrations. Master navigators taught by creating small-scale models using hands and arms to show how different swell systems interacted, how islands disrupted wave patterns, and where reflection zones appeared. These teaching tools conveyed concepts that resisted verbal description, allowing apprentices to visualize three-dimensional ocean dynamics. Seasonal variations demanded adjusted wave interpretation. Summer months brought different dominant swell systems than winter conditions. Monsoon seasons in Western Pacific regions created temporary wave patterns that vanished entirely during tradewind months. Navigators maintained mental calendars tracking these changes, knowing that wave patterns reliable in June became misleading indicators by December. The technique's effectiveness faced ultimate proof during storm navigation. When cyclones destroyed visibility, shredded sails, and created wave chaos seemingly devoid of pattern, master navigators maintained course by identifying the underlying deep ocean swells that continued propagating beneath the surface confusion. Those long-period waves, generated thousands of miles away, remained unaffected by local storm conditions and provided stable directional references throughout the tempest. European sailors encountering traditional navigators often dismissed wave reading as superstition or lucky guessing. The methods appeared too imprecise, too subjective, too dependent on unmeasurable personal sensitivity. Yet the results spoke definitively. Navigators using wave reading techniques regularly found islands after weeks at sea, while European ships with compasses, charts, and trained mathematicians wandered lost until provisions ran critically low. Modern scientific investigation finally validated traditional claims. Oceanographers using sensitive instruments confirmed that islands did create detectable wave shadows and reflection patterns extending for 50-100 miles. Computer models showed how multiple swell systems created navigation lattices across ocean basins. GPS tracking of traditional navigators demonstrated they maintained accuracy equivalent to compass navigation through wave steering alone sometimes achieving superior results when magnetic variation confused instrument readings. The wave-reading tradition represented applied physics centuries ahead of Western scientific understanding. Polynesian navigators had developed practical oceanography through observation and experimentation, creating functional models of wave dynamics that oceanographers wouldn't formalize mathematically until the 1960s. Their knowledge proved that sophisticated science could emerge without laboratories, equations, or academic institutions. Only sustained observation, rigorous training, and life-or-death stakes that ruthlessly eliminated ineffective techniques. Yet waves and stars together still couldn't fully explain Polynesian success in locating specific islands across thousands of miles of featureless ocean. Other navigation components remained undiscovered, techniques that operated beyond sight and feel, methods that allowed families to cross unprecedented distances and arrive precisely at intended destinations, despite lacking any technology Europeans considered essential for oceanic navigation. Birds transformed into living compasses pointing toward invisible land. Certain seabird species flew out to feeding grounds every dawn and returned to nesting islands each evening, creating reliable directional lines extending 120 miles from shore. Navigators knew which birds travelled farthest and what their flight patterns revealed about distance to land. The frigate bird, unable to land on water due to non-waterproof feathers, ranged up to 120 miles from shore before turning back toward roosts. Spotting a frigate bird in morning hours indicated land existed in the direction from which the bird flew. Terns and noddies provided shorter range information. These species ventured perhaps 30-40 miles from nesting sites, their presence announcing proximity to islands within a day's sailing. Boobies hunted even closer to shore, rarely exceeding 20 miles from land. A navigator tracking different bird species throughout the day could triangulate island position by noting which species appeared at what times and from which directions. Bird behavior contained additional messages. Flocks returning to roost in evening flew direct routes home, ignoring wind direction and taking the shortest path to land. A navigator observing these homeward flights gained precise bearings to follow. Morning departure flights scattered more randomly as birds searched for productive feeding areas, but concentrated evening returns drew straight lines toward islands. The transition from scattered morning birds to organized evening flights announced approximate distance. Islands within 50 miles produced noticeably directional evening bird traffic. Cloud formations announced land presence when no birds flew. Islands created thermal updrafts as sun-heated land warmed surrounding air, causing moisture to condense into stationary cloud formations. These clouds remained fixed while wind-driven clouds moved across the sky, creating distinctive markers visible from 30-40 miles away. A single stationary cloud on an otherwise clear horizon marked an island's position as definitively as any lighthouse. The cloud technique required distinguishing stationary formations from slow-moving systems. Navigators observed cloud positions relative to star points at dawn, then checked again hours later. Wind-driven clouds shifted noticeably against celestial references. Land-generated clouds maintained fixed positions despite prevailing winds attempting to push them. This distinction became critical when multiple cloud systems filled the sky, forcing navigators to identify which formations announced islands versus which merely indicated atmospheric conditions. Lagoon reflections created coloured patches on cloud undersides visible from extraordinary distances. Large lagoons with white sand bottoms reflected brilliant turquoise light upward, tinting clouds with distinctive aquamarine hues detectable from 30 miles offshore. Dense forest created greenish reflections. Bare rock produced grey tones. Each colour signature revealed island characteristics before the land itself appeared over the horizon, allowing navigators to confirm they approached intended destinations rather than similar-appearing alternatives. The smell of land carried on winds across surprising distances. Islands with dense vegetation released aromatic compounds, flower scents, decaying plant matter, soil odours that travelled downwind for 20-30 miles in favourable conditions. Navigators trained themselves to recognise these smells, distinguishing volcanic island scents from coral atoll odours and identifying specific vegetation types. A navigator detecting land smell knew both the direction and approximate nature of approaching islands, adjusting approach angles to find suitable harbours. Bioluminescence patterns revealed current directions and underwater geography. Plankton species glowing when disturbed created luminous trails behind the canoe at night, showing whether the vessel maintained straight courses or drifted sideways. Strong currents produced distinctive streaming patterns in bioluminescent waters. Shallow reefs concentrated certain glowing organisms, creating patches of light that marked hazardous areas approaching islands. Deep channels through reef systems appeared as dark lanes cutting through luminescent shallows. Watercolour transitions announced approaching land through subtle changes invisible to untrained observers. Deep ocean maintained consistent dark blue coloration. Shallow waters over submerged reefs shifted to lighter blue or green depending on depth and bottom composition. The boundary between deep and shallow water marked reef edges, typically surrounding islands at distances varying from hundreds of yards to several miles offshore. Navigators watching for these colour changes could avoid grounding on unexpected reefs during approaches. Floating debris provided directional clues about nearby land. Coconuts, palm fronds, driftwood, and other vegetation floating on currents indicated recent storms had washed material from islands. The debris drift direction revealed prevailing local currents, while the material type suggested island characteristics. Atolls produced different debris than high volcanic islands. Fresh green vegetation announced very recent origin, meaning islands existed close by in the upcurrent direction. Bird migration patterns created seasonal highways across the Pacific. Pacific golden plovers migrated between Alaska and Pacific Islands annually, following consistent routes that navigators recognized and utilized. Bristle-thighed curlews traveled from Alaska to scattered island groups, their presence indicating specific geographic regions. By timing voyages to coincide with migration seasons, navigators gained additional directional references as thousands of birds funneled through specific ocean corridors. Fish behavior announced island proximity through concentration patterns. Tuna and dolphin schools congregated near islands where upwelling currents brought nutrients to surface waters. Encountering dense fish activity after days in relatively barren open ocean suggested land existed within 50-100 miles. Specific fish species preferred different island types. Some favoured deep channels near high islands, while others concentrated around atoll passes, allowing navigators to deduce approaching island characteristics from the fish species encountered. Ocean temperature changes marked major current boundaries and provided latitude references. A navigator trailing fingers in water could feel the transition from warm equatorial waters to cooler subtropical flows. These boundaries remained relatively stable across seasons, though they shifted slightly north or south with annual cycles. Temperature awareness allowed navigators to confirm latitude estimates derived from star observations, creating redundant navigation systems that reduced catastrophic error risks. Atmospheric phenomena provided weather prediction critical for survival. Specific cloud formations announced approaching storms hours before conditions deteriorated. High cirrus clouds and characteristic patterns indicated tropical cyclone development, potentially hundreds of miles away. The sky's colour at sunset revealed moisture content, and predicted next-day weather conditions. Navigators combined these observations with seasonal knowledge, knowing which months brought cyclone risks and adjusting voyage timing accordingly. Wave cloud interactions created distinctive patterns near islands. Wind flowing over land masses generated turbulence that appeared as roiled cloud formations downwind of islands. This atmospheric disturbance extended for miles beyond the island itself, creating a visible marker of land presence even when the island remained below the horizon. The effect intensified with high volcanic islands that forced air to rise sharply, creating spectacular cloud formations that announced major land masses from extreme distances. Whale migrations followed consistent routes between breeding and feeding grounds. Humpback whales travelled from Antarctic feeding areas to tropical breeding grounds near specific island chains. Their seasonal movements created predictable concentrations in certain regions, and their presence indicated geographic position within the broader Pacific. Navigators who encountered whale pods during migration seasons could narrow their position estimates by knowing which populations frequented which ocean areas. The combination of signs created redundant navigation systems that prevented single-point failures. A navigator who lost star references due to clouds could maintain course using wave patterns while watching for bird activity. If waves became confused during storms, bird flights and cloud formations provided alternative position indicators. This redundancy proved crucial during extended voyages when conditions varied dramatically and no single navigation method remained consistently available. Training integrated all these signs into unified awareness. Apprentice navigators learned to scan continuously, processing information from multiple sources simultaneously without conscious effort. They developed the ability to recognize significant changes instantly. A bird species appearing earlier than expected, cloud colors shifting unexpectedly, or water temperature dropping suddenly. These changes triggered immediate reassessment of position estimates and course corrections when necessary. The knowledge extended beyond simple observation to understanding causation. Navigators knew why birds flew certain patterns, what atmospheric processes created stationary clouds, how underwater topography affected bioluminescence, and why fish concentrated near islands. This theoretical understanding allowed them to extrapolate from partial information, inferring complete pictures from limited data when conditions obscured direct observation. Modern scientific instruments confirmed the validity of these traditional techniques. Satellite imagery revealed that stationary clouds did form over islands exactly as navigators described. Oceanographic studies documented the current patterns, temperature boundaries, and wave dynamics that traditional knowledge encoded. Behavioral studies of seabirds verified their range limits and nesting patterns. Each validation demonstrated that Polynesian navigation represented rigorous empirical science rather than mystical intuition. The integration of these diverse signals created navigation capability exceeding contemporary European methods in certain respects. While European sailors relied heavily on compass bearings and dead reckoning, both prone to cumulative errors, Polynesian navigators cross-referenced dozens of independent indicators. A compass could malfunction or suffer magnetic variation errors. Stars couldn't malfunction. Birds couldn't drift. Clouds consistently formed over land. The natural world provided self-checking navigation systems that improved reliability rather than introducing single-point failure risks. Yet even this comprehensive toolkit of natural signs didn't completely explain how families survived months-long voyages carrying everything needed to establish viable colonies on uninhabited islands. The navigation knowledge solved only part of the challenge. Engineering sophisticated vessels capable of carrying 50-80 people, plus provisions, livestock, and planting materials across thousands of miles of storm-prone ocean required additional innovations that pushed Stone Age technology to theoretical limits. The canoes that crossed thousands of miles of open ocean represented engineering sophistication, disguised by wooden simplicity. These weren't hollowed logs with crude sails, but precisely calculated vessels, requiring years of specialized knowledge and technical mastery. A single construction error, wood selected from the wrong tree species, a hull joint misaligned by millimeters, or lashing tension incorrectly distributed, could doom everyone aboard when storm struck hundreds of miles from land. Tree selection began the multi-year construction process. Master boat builders identified specific tree species possessing optimal characteristics: sufficient size for large hull sections, wood grain running consistently straight, natural resistance to saltwater rot, and flexibility that allowed bending without breaking. They marked chosen trees years before felling, allowing time for proper seasoning while still standing. The timing of harvest mattered critically. Cutting during specific lunar phases produced wood less prone to cracking and splitting. Felling massive trees without metal axes required controlled burning combined with stone adze work. Builders kindled fires at the base, maintaining carefully regulated temperatures that charred wood without spreading flames uncontrollably. They scraped away carbonized material with shell tools, repeated the burning, and gradually worked through trunks exceeding 6 feet in diameter. The process demanded weeks of continuous attention, with work crews rotating to maintain 24-hour operations until the tree fell. Shaping hulls pushed stone tool technology to absolute limits. Volcanic glass and basalt adzes sharp enough to shave hair-removed wood in precise increments, creating hull curves calculated for hydrodynamic efficiency. Master craftsmen checked symmetry constantly, knowing that imbalanced hulls would veer off course under sail, requiring constant steering corrections that slowed progress and exhausted crews. The tolerance for error measured in millimeters across hulls stretching 60-80 feet in length. Fire contributed to shaping as much as cutting tools. Builders applied controlled burns to interior sections, charring wood to specific depths before scraping away carbonized material. This technique allowed faster material removal than pure adze work while creating smooth interior surfaces. The skill lay in preventing burns from penetrating too deeply or cracking hull planking. Either mistake could compromise structural integrity and create catastrophic leaks far from any repair capability. The double-hull design provided stability unattainable with single-hulled vessels. 2 parallel hulls connected by cross-beams and lashed platforms created a vessel that resisted capsizing even in heavy-beam seas. The separation between hulls, typically 8 to 12 feet, generated resistance to rolling that kept decks relatively level during storms. This stability allowed carrying provisions, livestock and passengers without dangerous weight shifts that could overwhelm single-hulled craft. Crossbeams connecting the twin hulls bore enormous structural loads and required precise engineering. These beams had to flex enough to absorb wave impacts without breaking, yet remain rigid enough to prevent hull separation. Builders shaped them with carefully calculated thickness variations, creating stress distribution that matched anticipated load patterns. Failure of a single crossbeam during storms could begin structural collapse that progressively overwhelmed remaining connections. Lashing techniques using coconut fiber senet achieved what nails and metal fasteners couldn't: joints that flexed under stress rather than snapping. The entire vessel could twist and bend as waves struck from different angles, dissipating energy through controlled movement rather than resisting rigidly until materials failed catastrophically. This flexibility proved crucial in surviving the massive swells and confused seas generated by Pacific storms. The lashing patterns themselves encoded sophisticated engineering knowledge. Different joint types required specific lashing configurations that distributed stress optimally. Builders memorized dozens of patterns, each suited to particular structural applications. The tension applied during lashing mattered as critically as the pattern. Too loose allowed dangerous play in joints. Too tight created stress concentrations that accelerated wear and failure. Sail technology represented another arena of advanced engineering. Woven pandanus, or palm fronds, created sails that could be reefed during storms by removing horizontal sections, reducing sail area while maintaining balanced forces. The weaving patterns provided strength in specific directions, resisting tear propagation that could shred sails within seconds during squalls. Sailors could adjust sail shape by shifting stay positions, optimizing performance for different wind conditions. The asymmetric hull design countered sideways drift from wind pressure. One hull rode slightly deeper in water than its twin, creating differential resistance that compensated for the tendency of sailing vessels to slip sideways while moving forward. This innovation allowed maintaining course accuracy without constant steering corrections, conserving crew energy during extended voyages, and preventing cumulative navigational errors from drift. Speed capabilities exceeded European expectations for vessels built without metal tools. Under optimal conditions, these canoes achieved 15 to 20 knots, faster than contemporary European merchant vessels and competitive with purpose-built racing yachts. The combination of narrow hulls, high length-to-beam ratios, and efficient sail plans created vessels optimized for covering maximum distance rather than carrying maximum cargo, precisely the design priority for exploration and colonization missions. Steering systems incorporated sophisticated understanding of hydrodynamics. Large steering oars mounted at stern quarters provided directional control through blade angle adjustments. The oars doubled as rudders when sailors needed both hands free for sail management during storms. Experienced helmsmen developed such precise feel for steering response that they maintained courses through darkness and heavy weather by the canoe's motion alone. Ballast systems using coral stones or sand in sealed containers lowered the center of gravity and increased stability. Builders calculated ballast requirements based on expected crew size, provisions weight, and livestock numbers. Insufficient ballast created dangerous instability, while excessive ballast reduced freeboard and increased wave washing that could swamp the vessel. Getting this calculation correct before departure proved essential since redistributing ballast at sea created risk during the operation itself. Living spaces on the connecting platform between hulls provided shelter from waves and weather. Woven mat structures created windbreaks and sun protection, while remaining light enough to avoid top-heavy instability. These structures could be disassembled during storms to reduce windage, then quickly rebuilt when conditions moderated. The platform also served as workspace for food preparation, equipment storage, and social activities during the weeks at sea. Water storage required ingenious solutions to prevent contamination and minimize weight. Sealed bamboo sections and tightly woven gourds kept fresh water separated from salt spray. Builders tested containers exhaustively before voyages, knowing that water supply failures guaranteed death. The containers had to survive being dropped, stepped on, and battered by waves while maintaining perfect seals, a technical challenge solved through material selection and construction techniques refined across generations. Provision storage incorporated preservation methods that prevented spoilage during month-long voyages. Breadfruit paste fermented and sealed in leaf packets remained edible for months. Dried fish wrapped in specific leaf combinations resisted mold growth. Coconuts provided both food and water while serving as ballast. Every food item loaded aboard had to justify its weight-to-nutrition ratio and survive tropical heat without refrigeration. Livestock transport pushed design limits as canoes became mobile farms. Pigs, chickens, and dogs required feeding, watering, and waste management for weeks at sea. Builders designed specialized pens that kept animals secure during storms, while allowing enough movement to prevent injury from prolonged confinement. The animals themselves served as breeding stock for establishing populations on newly discovered islands, making their survival crucial to colonization success. The social organization required for construction rivaled the technical challenges. Building a major voyaging canoe demanded coordinated labor from dozens of specialists over months or years. Master builders directed the work while specialists handled specific tasks, selecting trees, shaping hulls, weaving sails, preparing lashing materials, and crafting navigation equipment. The economic investment represented significant community resources, generating social obligations between boat builders and the communities that supported their work. Master craftsmen held knowledge as carefully guarded as navigation secrets. Specific construction techniques passed from masters to selected apprentices through years of observation and practice. The knowledge encompassed material science, structural engineering, hydrodynamics, and quality control, all transmitted orally and through demonstration rather than written plans or mathematical calculations. This oral transmission meant a master's death could erase construction knowledge for specific vessel types if apprentices hadn't completed their training. Testing occurred progressively throughout construction, with builders checking hull symmetry, joint strength, and waterproofing at each stage. Final testing in protected waters allowed adjustments before committing to open ocean voyages. Crews spent days sailing near shore, evaluating handling characteristics, identifying weak points, and breaking in new lashing that would stretch and settle. These shakedown cruises revealed problems correctable in home waters, but potentially fatal if discovered during ocean crossings. The vessels represented accumulated improvements over centuries. Each generation of boat builders refined designs based on performance data from previous voyages. Hulls that survived major storms saw their proportions replicated. Innovative lashing patterns that reduced maintenance spread through building communities. Sail designs that provided better performance in specific conditions became standard. This evolutionary process created vessels approaching theoretical optimization for their intended purpose, crossing enormous ocean distances with maximum reliability. European observers initially dismissed these vessels as primitive canoes, unable to recognize the sophisticated engineering concealed within apparently simple construction. The absence of metal fasteners, complex rigging, and elaborate deck structures suggested crude craftsmanship to eyes trained on European shipbuilding traditions. Only decades of anthropological study revealed how Polynesian vessels achieved superior performance in specific applications through engineering philosophies fundamentally different from European approaches. Modern naval architects analyzing traditional canoe designs identified features that anticipated later European innovations by centuries. The double-hull configuration wouldn't appear in Western vessels until catamaran development in the 20th century. Flexible lashing that absorbed stress anticipated modern rubber-mounted rigging. Asymmetric hull designs to counter drift wouldn't be theoretically understood by Western naval architects until computer modeling became available. The vessels demonstrated that optimal engineering solutions could emerge from empirical observation and incremental refinement without formal scientific theory. Yet even perfectly engineered vessels couldn't guarantee survival without the accumulated knowledge to use them effectively. The navigation techniques, the canoe technology, and the natural signs together formed only part of the complete system. Memorizing this integrated knowledge and passing it between generations without writing required educational methods as sophisticated as the technical capabilities themselves, creating entire schools of oceanic science that existed purely in human minds. The entire Pacific Ocean existed as a three-dimensional map inside human minds, stored without paper, charts, or any external reference system. Navigation schools operated on specific islands, where apprentices trained for 20 years or more, absorbing knowledge that would have filled libraries if converted to written form. These weren't casual learning environments, but rigorous institutions where failure meant not just personal disgrace, but potential death for future crews relying on flawed information. Master navigators selected students based on demonstrated memory capacity and spatial reasoning abilities. A prospective apprentice might face tests requiring recall of complex patterns after single viewings, or navigation of familiar waters while blindfolded, proving baseline capabilities before formal training began. Communities understood that investing decades in training someone who lacked fundamental aptitudes wasted resources that could produce competent navigators if directed toward better candidates. The stick charts used for teaching represented abstractions rather than literal maps. Constructed from coconut midribs lashed together with shell markers indicating island positions, these models demonstrated wave interference patterns around archipelagos. Instructors manipulated the charts while explaining how swells bent around islands, where reflection zones appeared, and how navigators could detect these patterns from canoes. The charts never left land. Carrying them on voyages would be admitting the navigator hadn't truly internalized the knowledge. Mental encoding techniques transformed navigation data into memorable forms. Each island received a position defined by star courses from multiple reference points, creating redundant location information. A navigator memorizing routes from Tahiti to Hawaii also learned the reciprocal course from Hawaii to Tahiti, the course from Hawaii to the Marquesas, and alternative routes accounting for seasonal wind variations. This web of interconnected courses meant forgetting a single route didn't strand the navigator without options. The ETAC system revolutionized how navigators conceptualized ocean travel. Rather than imagining the canoe moving through fixed space, they visualized a reference island moving backward past the vessel, while the destination island approached from ahead. The mental trick allowed tracking position by calculating how far the reference island had traveled relative to the canoe's star path, effectively creating a positional coordinate system without instruments. The technique demanded holding multiple moving reference points in mind simultaneously throughout voyages lasting weeks. Chants encoded navigation knowledge in rhythmic forms that aided memorization and prevented information corruption. A single chant might contain star sequences for a complete voyage, seasonal wind patterns, wave characteristics near specific islands, and emergency alternative routes. The rhythm and meter made errors immediately apparent. A navigator who stumbled over a verse knew their memory had degraded and required refreshing before attempting actual voyages. These chants passed through generations with accuracy rivaling written records, as any deviation from standard forms marked the reciter as improperly trained. Genealogies served dual purposes as historical records and navigation databases. Family lineages embedded geographic information by associating ancestors with specific islands, voyages, and discoveries. A navigator reciting genealogy simultaneously accessed encoded data about island relationships, historical settlement patterns, and traditional routes between territories. The system leveraged existing cultural knowledge frameworks, ensuring navigation information received the same careful preservation as socially crucial kinship data. Master navigators could recite courses between dozens of island pairs from memory, including primary routes, seasonal alternatives, and emergency diversions for storm conditions. This represented hundreds of individual course segments, each requiring accurate recall of star sequences, wave patterns, bird ranges, and landfall signs. The memory load exceeded what European navigators managed even with written records and regular reference to charts. Training methods exploited multiple memory systems simultaneously. Visual learners studied stick charts and memorized star positions against horizon markers. Kinesthetic learners practiced feeling wave patterns and maintaining courses by physical sensation. Auditory learners absorbed chants and rhythmic information encoding. Spatial learners built mental models of Pacific geography. Master instructors adapted teaching approaches to individual apprentice strengths, while ensuring comprehensive competency across all methods. The apprenticeship timeline reflected knowledge complexity. Initial years focused on basic concepts, star identification, primary swell systems, common bird species, and local island positions. Middle years introduced complete voyage planning, emergency procedures, and backup navigation methods. Final years involved supervised voyages where apprentices navigated under master observation, receiving corrections and additional instruction based on real performance. Only after successful completion of multiple supervised voyages could an apprentice claim navigator status. Knowledge testing occurred through increasingly difficult challenges. A master might describe hypothetical storm conditions that disrupted normal navigation signs and demand the apprentice describe appropriate responses. Another test involved presenting contradictory information, claiming a specific star indicated one direction while wave patterns suggested another, forcing the apprentice to recognize errors and identify correct references. These intellectual challenges prepared navigators for inevitable real situations where some indicators failed or provided ambiguous data. Communities recognized master navigators as living treasures whose value exceeded material wealth. These individuals carried information essential for maintaining inter-island contact, conducting trade voyages, and launching exploration expeditions. Their death represented catastrophic knowledge loss that could isolate communities or eliminate expansion capabilities. Societies developed elaborate protocols protecting navigators from unnecessary risks, ensuring knowledge transfer to sufficient apprentices before age or illness claimed masters. The oral transmission system created both resilience and fragility. Multiple navigators possessing identical knowledge provided redundancy against individual deaths. However, systematic disruption of training cycles could sever knowledge transmission entirely. A generation without properly trained navigators lost not just current capabilities, but the ability to train future generations, creating permanent knowledge extinction. Geographic knowledge extended beyond simple island positions to include ecological details crucial for survival. Navigators memorized which islands provided fresh water year-round versus seasonally, where safe harbors existed for storm refuge, which islands supported food resources adequate for reprovisioning, and where dangerous reefs or currents created hazards. This ecological database transformed navigation from mere route finding to comprehensive survival planning. Backup routes and contingency plans received equal attention to primary courses. A navigator planning voyages from Tahiti to Hawaii memorized not just the direct route, but alternative courses compensating for unexpected wind shifts, storm diversions, or navigation errors that push the canoe off intended track. These contingencies might direct toward intermediate islands for reprovisioning or prescribe modified star courses that intercepted the destination from different angles. The conceptual framework treated the ocean as a readable text rather than an obstacle. Watercolor announced reef proximity. Cloud formations spelled out island positions. Wave patterns diagrammed underwater geography. Bird flights drew direction arrows. Each natural element contributed sentences to an ongoing narrative that navigators read continuously, synthesizing information from dozens of simultaneous sources into coherent understanding of position and environmental conditions. Seasonal variations demanded adjusted mental models throughout the year. Navigators maintained separate knowledge sets for summer and winter sailing, dry and wet seasons, and transitional periods when conditions became unpredictable. The star paths reliable in June required different interpretations by December, when Earth's axial tilt shifted celestial positions. Wave patterns changed with seasonal storm tracks. Bird migrations altered which species provided navigation assistance in different months. Inter-island communication networks distributed navigation updates across archipelagos. When navigators discovered new islands, modified routes for improved efficiency, or identified previously unknown hazards, this information propagated through the navigation community during trade voyages. The knowledge network operated without formal organization, relying on cultural norms that emphasize sharing survival-critical information. Hoarding navigation knowledge that could prevent others' deaths violated deep social taboos. Error correction mechanisms protected against accumulated knowledge drift. When multiple navigators independently reported the same route or island position, their agreement validated the information's accuracy. Discrepancies prompted investigation and testing until consensus emerged about correct data. This collective verification process maintained knowledge integrity across generations, functioning as quality control without written standards or formal authorities. The system produced navigators whose spatial memory capabilities seemed superhuman to external observers. Testing by 20th century anthropologists found that elderly traditional navigators could accurately recall island positions, star courses, and ocean conditions for regions they hadn't visited in decades. Their mental maps remained stable and accessible despite years without active use, suggesting the training created permanent cognitive structures resistant to normal memory decay. Spiritual dimensions intertwined with technical knowledge in ways that reinforced memorization and performance. Navigation chants often invoked ancestral navigators, creating psychological connections between current practitioners and historical masters. These spiritual elements provided motivational frameworks that sustained the brutal dedication required for decades of training and the courage necessary to sail toward death-defying uncertainty. The apprenticeship created something beyond technical training. It produced a distinct cognitive framework for understanding space, time, and movement. Navigators thought differently about geography than non-navigators, maintaining continuous awareness of directional references, environmental patterns, and positional relationships. This perpetual navigation consciousness became so integrated into thought patterns that masters reported difficulty turning it off even during routine land activities. Modern cognitive science studying traditional navigators identified measurable brain differences compared to non-navigating populations. The hippocampus, brain regions associated with spatial memory and navigation, showed structural differences in traditional wayfinders. Their neural architecture had literally adapted to support the extraordinary memory and spatial processing demands of oceanic navigation, demonstrating that the training produced fundamental neurological changes. Yet even this comprehensive mental database couldn't guarantee success without the courage to actually use it. Memorizing every star, wave pattern, and island position meant nothing if navigators refused to sail when population pressure or resource scarcity demanded expansion. The psychological challenge of implementing this knowledge, of gambling family survival on memorized information while sailing toward potentially empty horizons, required confronting fears that paralyzed less determined cultures, Planning these impossible journeys demanded calculating risks no sane person would willingly accept. Launching families toward potentially empty horizons required months of preparation that transformed suicidal gambles into calculated risks. Master navigators studied seasonal wind patterns for entire years before approving departure dates, waiting for the narrow windows when trade winds, currents, and cyclone risks aligned optimally. A voyage planned for the wrong month faced weather conditions that could double travel time or generate storms that no amount of skill could survive. The provisioning calculations border on impossible. 60 people required approximately 120 gallons of fresh water daily for drinking and cooking, meaning a 30-day voyage demanded 3,600 gallons, stored in containers woven from plant fibers or carved from gourds. Each container added weight that reduced freeboard and increased wave-washing risks. Navigators balanced survival needs against vessel performance, knowing that insufficient provisions meant death, while excessive weight created its own dangers. Breadfruit paste fermented and sealed in tea leaves provided caloric density that maximized food-to-weight ratios. Dried fish wrapped in specific leaf combinations resisted tropical mold that could render entire food supplies toxic within days. Coconuts served triple duty as food, water source, and ballast, though their weight-to-nutrition ratio made them inefficient compared to processed alternatives. Every food item loaded aboard faced brutal selection criteria. Items that spoiled quickly or provided minimal nutrition relative to weight simply couldn't justify their space. Live pigs, chickens, and dogs complicated logistics exponentially. These animals required daily feeding and watering throughout voyages that might extend 6 weeks if winds proved unfavorable or navigation errors forced course corrections. They needed specialized pens that prevented injury during storms while allowing enough movement to maintain health. Most critically, these creatures represented breeding stock for establishing viable populations on discovered islands. Their death during transit could doom colonization attempts even if crews reached land successfully. Planting materials required equally careful curation. Breadfruit cuttings, taro roots, banana shoots, and coconut seedlings all needed protection from salt spray while maintaining enough moisture to survive until transplanting on new islands. The agricultural packages represented complete ecosystems condensed into transportable form, containing everything necessary for establishing farms that could support permanent settlements. Losing these materials meant arriving on a resource-poor island without means of creating sustainable food production. The systematic approach to exploration revealed sophistication that contradicted any notion of random wandering. Scout canoes conducted short-range reconnaissance missions, sailing outward for several days in different directions while maintaining navigational references to home islands. These scouts reported back about bird flight patterns, cloud formations, and ocean conditions that might indicate undiscovered land beyond their range. Communities aggregated this intelligence over years, gradually building probability maps of where new islands might exist. Bird behavior provided the most reliable indicators of distant land. When scouts observed frigate birds flying from specific directions at dawn and returning those same directions at dusk, they knew land existed along those bearings within 120 miles. Multiple observations over weeks confirmed pattern consistency and ruled out aberrant behavior from lost individuals. This patient intelligence gathering transformed blind speculation into informed prediction, identifying specific compass bearings worth full expedition investigation. Cloud interpretation added crucial data to the targeting process. Persistent stationary clouds visible from Scout Canoe maximum range suggested islands approximately 70 to 100 miles distant. The cloud's characteristics revealed probable island types. Tall cumulus formations indicated high volcanic islands with significant landmass, while smaller clouds suggested coral atolls. This advance information allowed expedition planners to select crew compositions and provisions appropriate for anticipated conditions. Population pressure drove the expansion imperative with mathematical inevitability. Island carrying capacities limited sustainable populations, and human fertility ensured continuous growth beyond those limits. Communities faced stark choices: limit reproduction through infanticide or sexual restrictions, engage in warfare that reduced populations, or export excess people through colonization expeditions. The moral calculation made colonization the least objectionable option despite horrific death rates among explorers. The strategic decision to sail against prevailing trade winds during outward journeys demonstrated remarkable foresight. By struggling upwind toward exploration targets, expeditions ensured they could return downwind if they found nothing and needed to reach home before provisions exhausted. This strategy demanded exceptional sailing performance and crew endurance, but provided critical safety margins. A canoe that sailed downwind into empty ocean faced impossible upwind returns against trade winds that could halt progress entirely. Crew selection involved community-wide decisions about who possessed skills essential for successful colonization. Navigators obviously led expeditions, but successful settlements required agricultural experts who understood planting cycles, fishermen who could quickly establish food gathering, craftspeople who could build shelters and tools, spiritual leaders who maintained cultural continuity, and enough genetic diversity to prevent inbreeding in small founding populations. Each person filled specific roles in the colonization equation. Women and children comprised significant percentages of exploration crews, completely contradicting European maritime traditions of all-male expeditions. Families travelled together because successful colonization required immediate reproduction capabilities on new islands. A crew of only men could claim territory, but couldn't establish sustainable populations. The presence of children and pregnant women on voyages facing substantial death probabilities underscored the desperate calculations driving exploration. Entire family groups accepted mortality risks rather than remain on overcrowded home islands. Spiritual preparation consumed weeks before departure. Priests conducted ceremonies that simultaneously sought supernatural protection and reinforced social cohesion among crew members who would depend completely on each other for survival. These rituals weren't mere superstition, but served psychological functions, creating shared identity, reducing pre-voyage anxiety, and establishing behavioral norms that would govern the cramped, stressful conditions during ocean crossings. The ceremony's timing coincided with astronomical events that marked optimal departure windows. Full moons provided nighttime illumination for emergency procedures during early voyage stages, while the canoe remained relatively near home islands. Specific stellar configurations announced seasonal transitions when wind patterns shifted favourably. The spiritual and practical elements merged into unified preparation that addressed both material and psychological survival requirements. Backup plans accounted for numerous failure scenarios. If primary target islands proved uninhabitable, lacking fresh water, already occupied by hostile populations, or too resource-poor for farming, crews needed predetermined alternative destinations. These contingency routes required additional navigational knowledge beyond primary courses, multiplying the information masters had to transmit to expedition navigators. A voyage planned for one island might visit 3 or 4 before finding suitable colonization sites. The mathematics of risk acceptance revealed startling truth. Communities knowingly sent people to probable deaths. Success rates for exploration missions to distant islands likely ran below 50%, meaning more expeditions failed than succeeded. Yet the calculations worked. A successful colonization established populations that would grow exponentially, while staying on overcrowded home islands guaranteed resource conflicts, starvation, or warfare that killed people without any territorial gain. Equipment redundancy provided critical backup capabilities. Expeditions carried multiple sails, extra steering oars, replacement lashing materials, and backup water containers. If primary equipment failed mid-voyage, crews needed onboard resources for repairs or substitutions. The redundant equipment added substantial weight, but represented survival insurance that justified the performance trade-offs. Navigation equipment included more than just memorized knowledge. Carrying containers of specific sand types from home islands allowed navigators to compare with sand encountered on discovered islands, potentially identifying geological relationships that confirmed position. Collections of shells, corals, and rock samples created reference libraries for pattern matching. These physical items complemented mental navigation systems, providing tangible confirmation of position estimates derived from celestial and ocean observations. The social organization aboard canoes reflected careful planning rather than improvised hierarchy. Designated leaders made final decisions during emergencies, but daily operations involved distributed responsibilities among crew specialists. The navigator commanded during active sailing, but deferred to agricultural experts during landing site selection. This flexible authority structure maximized collective expertise while maintaining clear command during crisis situations. Training simulations prepared crews for specific emergency scenarios before departure. Communities staged mock storm responses where crews practiced reefing sails, securing provisions, and managing terrified livestock under time pressure. They rehearsed water rationing procedures and conflict resolution protocols that would govern stressed crews during extended hardships. These exercises identified individuals who panicked under pressure, allowing replacement before actual departure when failure meant death for everyone. The final pre-departure inspection checklist rivaled modern space mission protocols in thoroughness. Every lashing received tension testing. Hull integrity underwent visual inspection and physical testing. Provisions received inventory verification against calculated requirements. Water containers faced leakage testing. The inspection process took days and involved multiple experts who specialized in different canoe systems. Finding problems during inspection represented success. Discovering failures at sea meant disaster. Communities gathered for departure ceremonies that acknowledged the probable permanence of separation. Families said goodbyes, understanding they would likely never see departing relatives again, even if the expedition succeeded. Successful colonists rarely returned. Establishing new settlements consumed all available labour and resources. The emotional weight of these departures shaped Pacific cultures, creating traditions that honoured explorers while acknowledging the devastating personal costs of expansion. The moment of departure marked transition from careful planning to absolute commitment. Once the canoe sailed beyond easy return range, the crew's fate depended entirely on their preparation quality, navigation accuracy, canoe seaworthiness, and random chance regarding weather conditions. Turning back after several days of sailing often proved as dangerous as continuing forward, a calculated risk becoming an inescapable reality the moment land disappeared below the horizon. Death claimed more exploration canoes than success stories ever recorded. Hundreds of vessels vanished into the Pacific without trace, carrying families who sailed toward empty horizons and simply never arrived anywhere. The ocean kept their fate secret. No wreckage washed ashore. No survivors told tales of what went wrong. Only the permanent absence of people who departed and never returned. Tropical cyclones appeared with terrifying speed in Pacific waters, transforming calm seas into survival nightmares within hours. Wind speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour generated waves reaching 40-50 feet, that could snap wooden crossbeams like kindling. The first sign often came from subtle atmospheric pressure changes that navigators recognized through headaches and joint pain, providing perhaps 6 hours of warning before conditions became unsurvivable. Crews who failed to recognize these signals faced walls of water that crashed across decks, washing livestock and people overboard while tearing sails to shreds. Equipment failures hundreds of miles from land transformed manageable situations into death sentences. A steering oar cracked during storms left canoes unable to maintain safe angles to waves, causing beam-on rolling that could capsize even double-hulled vessels. Lashing that deteriorated from constant saltwater exposure might fail suddenly, allowing hull separation that opened both vessels to flooding. These failures often occurred during the worst possible conditions, heavy weather that made repairs dangerous or impossible, while the vessel desperately needed full structural integrity. The psychological strain broke even strong-willed crew members. Week after week of seeing only water in every direction created crushing sense of vulnerability that degraded judgment and morale. Some sailors developed acute anxiety that manifested as paralysis during critical moments when their labor was essential for survival. Others experienced psychotic breaks, convinced they saw islands where none existed, or hearing voices calling from empty ocean. Maintaining collective sanity required constant leadership attention that diverted energy from navigation and vessel management. Provisioning errors revealed themselves slowly and lethally. A navigator who miscalculated voyage duration by even a few days could exhaust water supplies while still days from landfall. Thirst killed faster than hunger, with dehydration causing organ failure within 3 to 4 days once water ran out. Crews dying of thirst while floating on infinite water experienced agonies that survivors never forgot. Swollen tongues, hallucinations, kidney failure, and finally unconsciousness preceding death. Starvation followed slower but equally fatal trajectories when food calculations proved insufficient. As provisions dwindled, daily rations shrank until people received barely enough to maintain consciousness. Protein deficiency caused muscle wasting as bodies cannibalized their own tissue for energy. Children died first, their smaller reserves exhausted before adults. The moral calculations of food distribution during crises likely created conflicts that tore crews apart socially, even before physical death claimed them all. Navigation errors represented the most common failure mode. Missing a target island by mere degrees meant sailing past into empty oceans stretching thousands of miles. A canoe that overshot Hawaii faced 2,000 miles of nothing before reaching North America, an impossible distance with available provisions. The margin for error was microscopic. Aiming at Easter Island from Tahiti required hitting a target 14 miles wide after travelling 200 miles. 2 degrees of error in any direction meant missing entirely. The evidence of lost expeditions survived in unexpected places. Genetic studies revealed Polynesian DNA in pre-Columbian South American populations, proving that some canoes reached the continent but couldn't return against easterly winds and currents. These stranded explorers likely died attempting to sail home or lived out lives isolated from their cultures, knowing they would never see their islands again. Their fate represented best-case scenarios for failed voyages. At least they reached land rather than perishing at sea. Archaeological evidence documented settlements that failed after initial success. Remote islands show occupation layers that abruptly end, indicating populations died out from isolation, environmental degradation, or resource exhaustion. These extinct colonies proved that reaching an island guaranteed nothing. Survival required sustainable resource management, and often depended on maintaining contact with other communities for trade and genetic diversity that small populations couldn't generate internally. Genetic bottlenecks in modern Pacific Island populations revealed how few individuals actually survived to colonize some territories. Hawaii's indigenous population descended from perhaps 200 to 300 original colonists, despite the archipelago's size suggesting it could support much larger founding groups. This bottleneck indicated either that few voyagers arrived, or that early mortality was catastrophic, killing most arrivals before they established viable breeding populations. The physical toll accumulated relentlessly during voyages. Constant saltwater exposure created painful sores that became infected without fresh water for cleaning. Tropical sun caused severe burns and heat exhaustion, despite improvised shade structures. Crew members developed saltwater boils, painful abscesses from bacteria entering damaged skin. These injuries degraded working capacity exactly when maximum physical labor was required for sailing, bailing, and maintaining the vessel. Sleep deprivation compounded every other challenge. Navigators needed to maintain watch throughout nights, tracking star positions and monitoring weather changes. Crew members rotated shifts for bailing accumulated water, managing sails, and watching for signs of land. No one achieved sustained restful sleep during multi-week voyages, creating accumulated exhaustion that impaired judgment and increased accident risks. A helmsman who dozed off could allow the canoe to drift off course for hours before anyone noticed. Injuries from the storm conditions killed even when initially survivable. A crew member with a broken leg suffered intensifying pain without medical treatment or even basic painkillers. Compound fractures became infected in the salt environment, leading to gangrene and eventual death. Head injuries from being struck by swinging booms or thrown against hulls during violent motion caused brain damage that manifested as confusion, aggression, or coma. The lack of medical capabilities meant that injuries requiring minor treatment on land became death sentences at sea. Cold presented unexpected dangers during voyages to higher latitudes. The journey to New Zealand crossed into temperate zones where water and air temperatures dropped dramatically. Crews accustomed to tropical warmth faced near-freezing conditions without adequate clothing designed for such environments. Hypothermia killed through progressive stages, shivering, confusion, loss of coordination, and finally unconsciousness and death. Wet clothing accelerated heat loss, and constant wave washing meant staying dry was impossible. Failed navigators who missed their targets faced the most protracted deaths. As provisions ran out, rational thought deteriorated into desperate irrationality. Some crews reportedly resorted to drinking seawater, despite knowing it accelerated dehydration, the maddening thirst overriding knowledge that saltwater caused kidney failure. Others consumed anything floating on ocean surface, ingesting toxic jellyfish or contaminated material that caused additional suffering. The final days involved delirium, unconsciousness, and death from organ failure. The psychological aftermath for survivors carried permanent scars. Crew members who watched children die of thirst, who participated in desperate decisions about food rationing, or who survived when family members perished bore guilt and trauma that shaped their remaining years. Some survivors refused to ever sail again, the psychological damage too severe for them to face open ocean. These hidden casualties received no monuments or recognition, their suffering invisible within success narratives. Communities that sent expeditions faced cascading losses beyond departed crews. Resources invested in constructing canoes and gathering provisions represented significant economic drains that produced no return when voyages failed. More devastating was the loss of genetic diversity. Entire family lineages disappeared, reducing the remaining population's breeding options and potentially eliminating specialized knowledge holders who took their expertise to watery graves. The death rate among Polynesian explorers almost certainly exceeded 50% over the entire expansion period. For every successful colonization, multiple attempts likely ended in complete failure and death. This attrition rate meant that Polynesian expansion represented one of history's bloodiest episodes of exploration, with total death tolls potentially reaching tens of thousands across the centuries of Pacific expansion. Yet survivors didn't speak primarily of death, but of the calculated necessity that drove them forward. Remaining on overpopulated islands meant certain resource depletion, warfare, and eventual civilization collapse. Sailing toward uncertain horizons at least offered chances for success, however slim. The risk acceptance demonstrated profound courage rather than recklessness. People who understood probability and chose to gamble on slim survival chances rather than accept guaranteed decline. The sailing expertise that developed through this blood-soaked process emerged directly from harsh selection pressure. Navigation techniques that failed killed their practitioners, removing those methods from the knowledge pool. Canoe designs that couldn't survive storms sank with their builders' secrets. Only the most effective techniques and most seaworthy vessels survived to be replicated and refined. Evolution operated on human knowledge systems through the cruelest possible mechanism: death of everyone associated with inferior methods. Modern attempts to replicate traditional voyages faced ethical constraints that prevented truly matching historical conditions. Contemporary recreations included safety vessels trailing nearby, modern communications equipment hidden aboard, and strict provisioning margins that historical expeditions couldn't afford. These safeguards meant modern voyages, however authentic in construction and navigation techniques, never faced the absolute commitment that characterized original exploration. Historical crews knew that no rescue was possible, that mistakes meant death, and that return was often impossible even if they survived to reach land. The courage required transcended physical bravery into existential acceptance of mortality. Every expedition member who boarded a canoe understood basic probability. Many voyages failed, and death at sea meant slow suffering rather than quick ends. They made peace with these prospects, developed cultural frameworks that honored exploration deaths, and maintained collective determination despite witnessing previous expeditions simply disappear. This sustained courage across generations enabled the expansion that no other ancient culture attempted at comparable scales. The price paid for Pacific colonization, measured in drowned families, starved children, and lost knowledge, would have ended expansion programs in cultures less committed to oceanic mastery. Yet Polynesians persisted, refining techniques through accumulated bitter experience, launching new expeditions even after devastating losses, and ultimately succeeding in creating the most extensive cultural territory in human history. Their achievement rested on mountains of bones scattered across the ocean floor, testament to the terrible cost of reaching paradise. The first sign appeared as a subtle change in cloud patterns after 3 weeks of empty horizon. A single stationary formation hung motionless, while wind-driven clouds streamed past, marking an invisible column rising from land beyond sight. The navigator who spotted it felt relief mixed with terror. After burning through 2/3 of provisions, the crew's survival now depended on that cloud, announcing habitable land rather than a barren rock. Frigate birds appeared the following morning, flying from the direction of the stationary cloud toward open ocean for feeding runs. Their presence confirmed the cloud wasn't illusion or misidentification, but marked actual land within 100 miles. The navigator adjusted course slightly, aiming for the precise point where evening birds would return. Crew members who had maintained discipline through weeks of uncertainty now allowed themselves hope, though veterans knew reaching land guaranteed nothing about survival prospects. The watercolour shifted from deep blue to lighter shades as submerged reefs appeared beneath the canoe. This transition announced proximity within 20 miles, but also warned of grinding hazards that could tear hulls open. The navigator slowed approach speed, posting observers at the bow to watch for coral heads barely visible beneath surface chop. One miscalculation here, after successfully crossing 2,000 miles of open ocean, could sink the vessel within sight of salvation. The island materialized gradually from the horizon, first a dark line distinguishing itself from sea, then growing vertically as the canoe closed distance. High volcanic peaks confirmed this was a major landmass rather than a low atoll, suggesting abundant fresh water and agricultural potential. Crew members scanned the shoreline through gathering dusk, searching for the most critical resource, a protected harbour where they could safely beach the canoe without waves smashing it against rocks. Dawn revealed a deep bay on the island's leeward side where reef systems created natural breakwaters. The canoe entered cautiously, crew members using poles to test depth and avoid coral outcroppings. They grounded the vessel on a sandy beach, and people who had been confined to wooden platforms for 25 days stumbled onto solid ground with legs barely functional from disuse. Children cried from overwhelming relief. Adults maintained focus. Reaching land was only the beginning. Scout parties spread across the island within hours, conducting systematic surveys that would determine survival viability. The first priority was fresh water. Streams cascading from mountain heights provided abundant supply, eliminating the most immediate life-threatening constraint. Next came food resources, fish in lagoons, coconut palms along beaches, and bird populations that could supplement provisions until gardens matured. The island passed initial habitability tests. Agricultural work began before anyone slept. Farmers unpacked carefully protected taro corms, breadfruit cuttings and banana shoots, planting them immediately in locations selected for optimal growing conditions. The plants had survived weeks in salt spray conditions and needed soil urgently, or they would die, wasting the genetic material that represented future food security. Every hour of delay increased mortality risks for the transplanted crops. Temporary shelters rose from local materials within days. Crews felled palm trees using stone axes and fire, shaped structural elements, and thatched roofs with palm fronds. These structures provided minimal protection from rain and sun but freed crew members from sleeping aboard the canoe. The construction pace reflected urgency. Monsoon season approached, and surviving storm conditions required more substantial housing than could be built immediately. Pigs and chickens released from their transport pens immediately began foraging across the island, feeding on vegetation and insects. The animals served as living food stores that would reproduce and multiply, creating sustainable protein sources. Their distribution across different areas prevented total loss if one location proved unsuitable or predators appeared. The breeding population needed protection from overhunting during initial settlement, when hunger drove people towards short-term thinking. Fishing techniques adapted to local reef conditions within weeks. The fish species differed from home islands, requiring new catching methods and identification of which species were edible versus toxic. Early settlers learned through dangerous trial and error. Several crew members likely died from ciguatera poisoning after consuming reef fish that concentrated toxins in their flesh. These deaths provided brutal education that survivors incorporated into expanding knowledge about the new environment. The settlement timeline revealed systematic expansion across the Pacific that historians now trace through multiple evidence lines. Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga received colonists by 1000 BCE, establishing initial footholds in Western Pacific regions relatively close to Southeast Asian origin points. These islands became staging bases for subsequent expeditions deeper into Oceania's vast emptiness. The Marquesas settlement around 200 BCE represented a critical expansion milestone, positioning Polynesian culture at the eastern extent of tropical Pacific islands. From the Marquesas, subsequent expeditions could target Hawaii to the north, Easter Island to the east, and the Society Islands to the south. This strategic position enabled the final phase of Pacific colonization that would eventually encompass areas larger than all other human territorial expansions combined. Hawaii received its first settlers around 400 CE, requiring voyages of over 2,000 miles from the Marquesas or Society Islands. The Hawaiian archipelago's isolation and distance from any other land meant colonists arrived knowing return was nearly impossible. Whatever they brought with them, tools, plants, animals, knowledge, constituted their complete inheritance. Nothing could be imported if critical items were forgotten or lost during transit. Easter Island colonization around 700 CE pushed the eastern boundary of Polynesian expansion to its absolute limit. At 200 miles from the nearest inhabited island and 2,000 miles from South America, Easter Island represented the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. The founding population numbered perhaps 30-50 people based on genetic analysis, creating a precarious demographic situation where a single epidemic or famine could cause extinction. New Zealand's settlement around 1280 CE completed Polynesian expansion into temperate latitudes requiring complete cultural adaptation. The climate shocked tropical adapted settlers with winter temperatures approaching freezing, conditions unknown in their ancestral experience. Traditional crops failed in the cold, forcing rapid adoption of available resources like moa birds and marine mammals. The adaptation demonstrated remarkable flexibility in Polynesian cultural systems. Each settlement transformed virgin islands into thoroughly Polynesian landscapes within generations. Forests fell to agriculture, terraces appeared on hillsides, irrigation systems channeled water to taro patches, and imported plant species spread across islands that had known only endemic vegetation for millions of years. The environmental modification created islands that appeared natural to later European explorers, but actually represented thoroughly engineered landscapes. Trade networks emerged between island groups despite distances that staggered European imaginations. Basalt adzes from Samoa travelled to the Marquesas, obsidian from Hawaii appeared on Tahiti, and red feathers, valuable ceremonial items, moved between archipelagos separated by thousands of miles. These trade goods proved regular contact continued for centuries after initial settlements, with voyaging canoes maintaining connections that preserved cultural unity across the Pacific. Archaeological evidence confirmed the settlement chronology and dispelled lingering doubts about Polynesian capabilities. Carbon dating of cooking fires, analysis of introduced species, and pottery-style evolution created timelines that matched oral histories preserved in chants and genealogies. The physical evidence vindicated traditional knowledge against European skepticism that had dismissed indigenous accounts as mythology. Linguistic analysis provided additional confirmation of expansion patterns. Hawaiian, Tahitian, Maori, and Rapa Nui languages all derive from common roots, their divergence measuring time elapsed since populations separated. The degree of linguistic drift between island groups matched archaeological timelines, with more isolated populations like Easter Island showing greater language evolution than frequently contacted groups in central Polynesia. The genetic evidence revealed unexpected details about expansion demographics. Most island populations showed mixed ancestry from multiple founding voyages rather than single colonization events. This pattern indicated that successful settlements attracted additional migrants, with later arrivals bringing genetic diversity that prevented inbreeding collapse. The genetic mixing suggested systematic follow-up expeditions to successful colonies rather than single isolated voyages. DNA analysis also confirmed sporadic contact between Polynesians and South American populations. Sweet potato, a South American crop, appeared in Polynesian agriculture centuries before European contact, requiring deliberate transport across 4,000 miles of ocean. Whether Polynesians reached South America and returned with the plant or South Americans drifted westward remains debated, but the evidence proved trans-Pacific contact occurred during pre-Columbian centuries. Population growth following successful colonization proceeded rapidly. Hawaiian archaeological sites showed population explosion from initial founding groups to perhaps 300,000 people by European contact. Easter Island supported 15,000 people at its demographic peak. These growth rates demonstrated that successful settlement created conditions for exponential population increase that validated the risk calculus driving exploration. The environmental costs of rapid population growth appeared within centuries. Easter Island's famous deforestation eliminated native palm forests entirely by 1650 CE, causing societal collapse as tree loss prevented canoe construction and oceanic fishing. Hawaii experienced massive bird extinctions as human hunting, and introduced rats eliminated species that had evolved without mammalian predators. The paradise that explorers discovered transformed into degraded environments through resource overexploitation. Cultural evolution accelerated in isolated populations. Hawaiian religion developed specialized deity hierarchies unknown in Tahiti. Maori art forms diverged dramatically from tropical Polynesian patterns, adapting to New Zealand's cooler climate and different materials. Easter Island culture created massive stone moai statues unique to that location. Distance and isolation produced cultural divergence while maintaining recognizable Polynesian foundations. Yet beneath the triumph of successful colonization lay uncomfortable reality. These paradise islands were purchased with uncountable deaths of failed expeditions. Every thriving settlement represented dozens of lost canoes, hundreds of drowned families, and techniques refined through elimination of practitioners whose methods proved inadequate. The success stories survived precisely because countless failures didn't, creating selection pressure that honed navigation and voyaging to extraordinary effectiveness. The achievement remained unmatched until European global expansion began in the 15th century. No other ancient culture attempted crossing comparable ocean distances, establishing permanent settlements thousands of miles from homeland territories, or maintaining regular contact across such vast empty spaces. Polynesian navigation represented humanity's most successful oceanic expansion. Accomplished with technology Europeans would have considered impossibly primitive. The legacy persisted until European contact disrupted traditional systems and nearly erased the knowledge that made Pacific colonization possible. What happened next? How centuries of accumulated wisdom almost vanished entirely, created modern urgency about recovering and preserving navigation techniques before the last traditional practitioners died without passing knowledge to sufficient successors. European contact struck Polynesian navigation systems like a cultural cyclone that destroyed centuries of accumulated knowledge within single generations. Christian missionaries arriving in the late 1700s dismissed traditional wayfinding as pagan superstition, disrupting the navigation schools where masters trained apprentices. Colonial governments imposed Western education that left no room for multi-decade apprenticeship studying stars and waves. The deliberate erasure happened with terrifying speed. Knowledge that had survived 2,000 years vanished in less than 100. Metal compasses and European charts seemed to make traditional methods obsolete. Why spend 20 years memorizing star paths when a compass provided instant directional reference? The logic appeared irrefutable until islanders realized that adopting Western navigation meant abandoning their own cultural identity. By then, the master navigators who could have reversed the loss were dead or too elderly to train sufficient successors. The knowledge hemorrhaged from living memory as traditional practitioners perished without replacement. The suppression extended beyond mere neglect into active prohibition. Colonial authorities sometimes banned traditional voyaging entirely, viewing inter-island contact as threat to administrative control. Missionaries preached that ancestral practices represented devil worship that needed elimination for salvation. Schools taught that indigenous knowledge was primitive superstition, while European science represented truth. Three forces, religious, governmental, and educational, converged to sever knowledge transmission that had endured millennia. By 1960, perhaps 12 master navigators remained alive who possessed complete traditional wayfinding knowledge. Most were elderly men living on remote atolls in Micronesia and Polynesia, representing the absolute final link to oceanic wisdom that predated European contact. Their average age exceeded 70, meaning they would die within a decade or two regardless of documentation efforts. Once they died, the knowledge died permanently. No amount of archaeological investigation or historical research could recover navigation techniques that existed only in human memory. The crisis galvanized a small community of anthropologists, historians, and Pacific Islanders who recognized what was being lost. They began systematically documenting traditional navigation through interviews, observations, and participation in actual voyages with elderly masters. The work proceeded with desperate urgency, racing against biological clocks that counted down toward irreversible cultural extinction. Every month of delay meant more knowledge holders dying, more techniques forgotten, more gaps appearing in the reconstructed picture. Maupiailug emerged as the most crucial knowledge holder. Born in 1932 on Satawal Atoll in Micronesia, he completed traditional navigation training under masters who maintained unbroken knowledge chains extending backward through centuries. By the 1970s, Piailug represented perhaps the last person alive with comprehensive mastery of traditional wayfinding techniques. His knowledge existed nowhere else. If he died without teaching others, entire knowledge categories would vanish forever. The Polynesian Voyaging Society formed in Hawaii in 1973, with the radical goal of proving traditional navigation could accomplish what European scholars still doubted. They planned to build a replica traditional voyaging canoe and sail it from Hawaii to Tahiti using only indigenous techniques. No compass, no sextant, no modern instruments whatsoever. The 2,400-mile voyage would either validate traditional methods or demonstrate they were insufficient for Pacific colonization, settling decades of academic debate through practical experiment. Constructing the canoe required rediscovering forgotten building techniques. The society recruited Hawaiian elders who remembered stories about traditional canoes and combined their accounts with archaeological evidence and historical descriptions. The resulting vessel, named Hokulea after Hawaii's zenith star, represented educated guesswork more than authentic reconstruction. Nobody alive had actually built a traditional voyaging canoe in over a century. Finding a navigator presented greater challenges. No Hawaiians possessed traditional wayfinding knowledge. The techniques had been lost completely in Hawaii decades earlier. The society had to invite Maupiailug from Micronesia to navigate the voyage, a solution that embarrassed Hawaiians who had to import expertise for their own cultural heritage. The embarrassment drove determination to learn, transforming the voyage into education mission as much as experimental validation. The 1976 voyage departure generated international attention and fierce skepticism. Many anthropologists predicted failure, arguing that traditional navigation was insufficient for reliably reaching specific islands across such distances. Some claimed Piailug would secretly use modern instruments once at sea. Others suggested the entire project was cultural romanticism that would endanger crew lives through pursuing impossible goals. The stakes escalated beyond mere academic interest into questions about indigenous cultural capabilities. Hokulea sailed from Hawaii on May 1, 1976, carrying Piailug as navigator and a crew of Hawaiians learning traditional techniques. The canoe had no engine, no radio, and no navigation instruments beyond what ancient Polynesians would have possessed. A support vessel followed at distance carrying safety equipment and modern communications, prepared to intervene if the experiment failed catastrophically. The crew understood they were attempting something no one had successfully done using traditional methods in over 2 centuries. Piailug navigated using stars, waves, bird flights, and cloud patterns exactly as his ancestors had for millennia. He called out course corrections based on observations invisible to untrained crew members, demonstrating knowledge that seemed magical to Western-educated observers. The canoe maintained its intended course despite having no mechanical steering aids or instruments for checking position. Days passed, then weeks, with nothing but ocean visible in all directions. On June 4, 1976, after 33 days at sea, Hokulea arrived at Tahiti within miles of Piailug's predicted landfall. The navigation accuracy astounded observers. Modern GPS analysis later confirmed his position. Estimates throughout the voyage had rarely exceeded 30-mile errors, despite travelling over 2,400 miles without instruments. Traditional navigation had passed the ultimate practical test, proving its effectiveness beyond any remaining scholarly doubt. The voyage's impact transcended academic validation into cultural revival. Hawaiians who'd been taught their ancestors were primitive discovered instead that Polynesian navigation represented sophisticated applied science. Pacific Islanders across the region embraced wayfinding knowledge as source of cultural pride rather than embarrassing superstition. The successful voyage sparked renewed interest in traditional techniques that had been dismissed as irrelevant for modern life. Piailug agreed to teach traditional navigation to Hawaiian students, beginning knowledge transfer that would preserve techniques for future generations. His apprentices spent years learning the same methods he had mastered as a youth, creating new generation of navigators who could carry forward traditions nearly lost to cultural suppression. The teaching process revealed how much knowledge had been encoded in methods that defied simple verbal explanation. True understanding required years of practical experience. Subsequent voyages explored the entire Polynesian triangle using traditional navigation. Hokulea sailed to New Zealand, Easter Island, and throughout Micronesia, retracing ancient migration routes and proving that traditional techniques worked across all Pacific conditions. Each voyage provided additional validation while training more navigators in methods that were being systematically reconstructed from fragments. Modern scientific instruments finally confirmed what traditional navigators had claimed. GPS tracking of traditional voyages showed navigation accuracy equivalent to compass-based methods, sometimes superior when accounting for magnetic variation. Oceanographic research validated wave pattern descriptions that had seemed exaggerated or metaphorical. Satellite imagery confirmed cloud formations over islands matched traditional accounts. Every technical claim made by indigenous knowledge holders proved accurate when properly tested. The cognitive science investigations revealed how traditional navigation created measurable brain differences. Navigators who trained in traditional methods developed enhanced spatial memory, superior pattern recognition, and heightened environmental awareness compared to non-navigators. Their mental capabilities adapted specifically to oceanic wayfinding demands, demonstrating that human cognitive potential could be developed far beyond normal baselines through appropriate training. The revival sparked cultural renaissance across Pacific Island communities. Young people who had rejected indigenous traditions as backward began seeking instruction from elderly knowledge holders while they still lived. Traditional navigation schools reopened on islands where they had been closed for generations. The voyaging canoes became floating classrooms that transmitted knowledge through direct experience rather than academic abstraction. European scholars who had spent careers arguing that Polynesian expansion happened through accidental drift rather than intentional navigation faced definitive refutation. The experimental voyages proved not only that traditional techniques worked, but that they provided reliability approaching or exceeding contemporary European methods. The racist assumption that primitive peoples couldn't master oceanic navigation collapsed under weight of demonstrated traditional competency. The knowledge recovery remained incomplete despite revival efforts. Many specific techniques were permanently lost when knowledge holders died before documentation. Certain routes, seasonal strategies, and specialized navigation methods for unusual conditions vanished into permanent obscurity. The recovered knowledge represented perhaps 70–80% of complete traditional systems, substantial but containing gaps that could never be filled. The modern recognition finally acknowledged what should have been obvious from the beginning. Polynesian navigation represented sophisticated applied science rather than lucky guesswork. They had developed practical oceanography, astronomy, and meteorology through systematic observation refined across centuries. Their techniques worked because they accurately modeled real physical processes, wave dynamics, atmospheric behavior, and celestial mechanics through empirical method rather than theoretical mathematics. The achievement placed Polynesian navigation among humanity's greatest intellectual accomplishments. They mastered the world's largest ocean using knowledge systems that existed entirely in trained human minds and bodies. Their success preceded European global exploration by a millennium and matched or exceeded Western technical capabilities in specific domains. The navigation represented triumph of human observational ability, memory capacity, and courage. The story comes full circle to the original mystery. Wooden canoes crossed 2,000 miles of open ocean, discovered over 1,000 islands, and created the most extensive cultural territory in human history. The answer lay not in single techniques, but in integrated systems that transform the ocean itself into navigation instrument. Stars provided directional references, waves announced island positions, birds drew lines toward land, clouds marked territories. Every natural element contributed information to navigators trained to read environmental language. The knowledge holders who preserved these techniques through centuries of cultural suppression, the apprentices who learned them despite modern life offering easier paths, and the communities that supported navigation revival ensured that this remarkable chapter of human achievement wouldn't vanish into historical obscurity. Traditional wayfinding survived, barely, to inform present understanding that sophisticated science can emerge from non-Western frameworks, that ocean mastery doesn't require instruments, and that human potential exceeds what settled societies consider possible. Polynesian navigators didn't conquer the Pacific through technological superiority, but through observational science, systematic knowledge preservation, and courage to sail toward uncertainty. They proved that humans could master environments that appeared impossible through dedication, training, and accumulated wisdom passed through generations. Their achievement stands as permanent testament to what people can accomplish when survival demands surpassing every limitation.